this is a time when there were jobs which were reserved for white people and jobs, menial jobs which were to be done by black people. And this was not profession, because some of the jobs, when you look back today, which were reserved for white people, were so stupid, you know, like getting into a lift and not being able to press what floor I go to. There's an old white man sitting there who says, floor, and then I should say, and then he presses for me. Now that was a job reserved for white persons. So I'm just giving the stupidity and the simpleness of some of the things which were happening. And then you had to speak out to say, I can do this, or take the specimen and read and say, I can produce this garment, and not be tolerant when you hear a white woman speaking, insulting the black woman who is next to me. I couldn't shut up. Then I speak out. And then that's the main thing that made one to be coming up and up. And this is not the only place in the industry, which was in the Garment Workers Union. I moved on after years and went and worked with your Archbishop Tutu. And there came a time when now women were to be ordinated to be priests. And there was so much of men against women being woman priests. And I worked very closely with a woman from Ireland who was a Catholic, who the Catholics don't have woman priests. But this woman worked very closely with us in the church to assist us that women should be ordained within the Catholic Church. So I take my hat off for the women in Ireland. They actually get involved even in the things which do not affect them. So Mary, that's why I said I was listening when you were speaking in the Mandela Day, and I heard you say that it's not in your place to speak about certain things like corruption and so forth. And I say, Mary, you have all the right to speak about all those things. See, this is what made me to be vocal, is not to be seeing people treated as human beings. That's the only reason.
So, Ma, what would be your advice? There are lots of young women in this audience here. We have a constitution that guarantees their rights. We have a gender commission. We have all the institutions that give women rights in this country. But we have an epidemic of child abuse, of girls in our school. Often being raped by other male pupils, being raped by teachers. We have the incidence of rape in the country. Probably 1 in 3 women are raped in our country. We have a huge epidemic of domestic violence. So we have all the laws, we have all the policies. What should these young women leaders in this room do? What should men, we should be asking men to do?
See, from my perspective, I think the women, the young women, are very quiet. They are not, their voice is not heard. You just see the woman expanding and being pregnant until they get their children. They do not challenge what is happening to them. And I challenge them to say, no one is going to speak on your behalf. Speak for yourselves. And let your voices be heard. Otherwise, you can't just be referring to the past that, you know, like we always do. Mandela used to do this. Where are the new Mandelas who are coming? And we don't even keep up with some of the things that he wants. Like, he loved education. Education, for me, from a distance, seems to be dwindling. And what are we doing about it? And why are we allowing it? Is it because we don't want to be enemies? We don't want to challenge things? We want to be loved by society? No. There it is. They will always remember you for challenging that which was not right.
You know,
and I encourage it.
There's a very important thing you raised here, because South Africa is a very religious nation. And many people observe faith. And that's why almost every major faith is recognized in South Africa. It's a tremendous victory for us. And we have a secular state that separates race and society from the state. But increasingly, we're starting to see the same struggles you're talking about, whether women should be priests. There are people talking in influential positions about reversing some women's rights. Whether that is in relation to tradition or culture, that women, almost sometimes women's place should be raising children and in the kitchen. So we're having that creeping traditionalism in this country. What is your advice to how women should handle that, given your experience that you've had in the church, particularly around, what Archbishop Tutu's views are on the issue of religion?
If I am as a student of today, and my teacher dodges me and goes to a shipping at times, or whatever place they go to, I'm definitely sure I would have organized some of the students I am with, and we would have went and pulled him out of that place to bring him back to the classroom, to do what he's supposed to be doing. And if not, the principal, why is the principal? The principal are usually men. Why are the principals quiet when they see these people disappearing from schools and not being at schools? And it does not give us joy, even when you watch on television, seeing children walking into school very late when the school has long started. And what are the heads of the school saying and doing? And parents, we should speak out. And you should talk to your colleague, your friend, to say, this is not the right thing to do. Is it because you want to keep friends? We were not worried about my friend will be angry with me if I tell him, this is not right, this is the right thing to do.
Mary, you are the one that really introduced me to the concept of climate justice. And we are experiencing a bout of extreme cold in South Africa. Snow. And you think we are crazy enough to go and take photographs of ourselves. But across the world, there are extremes of weather. There's millions of people displaced in Bangladesh and India because of flooding. There's the longest drought the US has experienced today that's going to impact on global food security because it affects the very areas where they grow food. The women that you know, and I know, we've been to in villages in India that used to go 100 feet into the ground to find water, have to go 1,000 feet. You've been to Darfur and seen how things like water and food cause wars. Who are the people that are most impacted by this? How do we relate our day-to-day lives, sitting here in a very comfortable conference center, to the fact that we are standing at the edge of a precipice today?
If you don't mind, before I answer that, and I will,
yes.
I just want to actually very much pick up on what Emma was saying and very much agree. What you said you would do is the human rights thing. Unless you speak out, unless you address what are violations of human rights, if education is not being properly, if there is violence, if there is corruption. I quoted a very famous passage from Eleanor Roosevelt, where, after all, the human rights begin in small places close to home. And then the last part of that is, but this will not happen unless you have concerted citizen action. And that's been missing a lot. Missing in my country quite a bit, missing here. That idea that you can't leave it to government or those who've been elected in some position, whether it's parliament or trade unions or whatever. It is everybody's responsibility. That's being a citizen. Your responsibility to respond. And I kind of agree with you. You talk about young people, young women here in South Africa. I would say the same about young women in Ireland. They've somehow forgotten the struggle. They've kind of become accustomed, and yet there are a lot of barriers still. And there isn't that same engagement that I think is so important to implement your fine constitution, for example, to implement the commitments that have been made, to make sure that people are brought to justice if they need to be, that maintenance orders are executed so that there is support for children when the father, the partner, the husband has left, etc. I wanted to make that human rights point, Jay, because I didn't come to the whole climate issue as somebody who's knowledgeable about climate and environment. I came to it very, very much as a human rights issue. I was doing a lot of work with colleagues in a number of African countries on health issues, including working with governments on supporting their capacity to ensure that they realised the right to health of their populations. Decent work issues, because work is a human right in Article 29 of the Universal Declaration. And I was a member of 3 trade unions in my day. Oh, no.
So, okay, you've got 3 trade unions here, okay?
Women, peace and security issues, etc. And the more I was travelling, representing a very small organisation, you have to partner.
Yes.
So I had a lot of partners and went to different countries and saw the same story in these different countries, slightly different, but the same issue. It began with a sentence beginning, "ah, but." And the "ah, but" sentence was, "ah, but things are so much worse." And I would say, why? Because we have no seasons anymore. Because we have long periods of drought and then flash flooding. In Liberia with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, it was, when I was growing up, we had rainy seasons. We had 2 predictable rainy seasons. Now, the rainy season comes, goes on for far too long. I don't know when it will stop. I don't know when the next one will start. How do I mend my roads? How do I plan for my economy? And getting back to Archbishop Tutu, it's almost as if he was sitting here between us, isn't it? I sat with Archbishop Tutu on a tribunal organised by Oxfam. I'm already the president of Oxfam. And we were listening to 5 African farmers from 5 different countries. And the very interesting thing was that 4 of those farmers were women, which is true. 80% or plus of the farming is done by women. And I remember those stories very well. The farmer from South Africa was a rooibos farmer, but where she was farming, they now had bad seasons and her crop was failing. She was there with her husband. The only man was from Kenya, and he was down to his last 20 of a herd of 200 goats from drought. The one from Uganda is a good friend of mine now, Constance O'Kellett. She lives in a village in northern Uganda. And when she was growing up, they had enough food because they knew when to plant and they knew when to harvest. But for the 10 years before this, and this was in 2009, just before Copenhagen, the weather pattern had changed entirely. And it was this drought and flash flooding that destroyed the school. So she formed a women's group and started to fight back. And then there was a woman from Mali, a cotton farmer, and from Malawi. And the woman from Malawi was the saddest of all, because she ended her story about that their whole livelihoods were destroyed. She said, and some of the women in our village are selling their bodies, but I can't do that because I'm HIV positive. And and I watched, and Arch was slumping at this stage. He was really listening, and he was so burdened. So I decided, to push back a bit and half joke, just to lift the mood even a bit. And I said, well, I come from the west of Ireland, from a very poor farming area. And in my experience, farmers always complain. That's what they do. They complain. They complain about the weather. That's what farmers do. And so I said to these poor 5 farmers, I tried to say it in a kind of light tone, I said, is that what you're doing? Are you complaining about a bad patch of weather? And it was Constance who responded to me with great dignity. She said to me, no, Mary, she said, this is outside our experience. And I thought that was a very interesting sentence. It hung there. This is outside our experience. And I thought to myself, what is the experience in a village, whether it's in northern Uganda or South Africa, wherever? It's probably 200 years. Because grandparents will tell grandchildren of this. So that was outside her experience, that they'd had long periods of drought and flash flooding, so that they were having terrible problems with security. And this is why it's such a human rights issue. And my foundation focuses on what we call climate justice, which is recognizing that actually the effects of climate change are happening in the very places that are least responsible, the poorest countries and the poorest communities, who have not been responsible for the oil and the gas and the fossil fuel and the cars and the use of fossil fuel to create energy for an economy. So what we're saying is, this isn't something you rush into court about. It's something that is part of modern development. First of all, there's a responsibility of the rich countries to cut down their emissions much more than we're doing. And I include Ireland in that, much more. Secondly, to help poor countries to become more resilient. And thirdly, the importance of energy, access to energy. I find it shocking, and I'll stop here because I could go on forever on this. You see, he pressed a button. But the last point I'll make is, imagine in the 21st century, in our world now of 7 billion people, 2.6 billion still cook on charcoal, firewood, animal dung, and ingest fumes that are very bad for their health. And of course, the vast majority are women. More women die of ingesting fumes than die of malaria. It's not acceptable, in particular because we now have clean cook stoves, and they're getting cheaper. So why don't we make sure that this, that is reversed and that everybody has access to clean cooking? The same thing with electricity. 1.3 billion people don't have access to electricity in the 21st century. A number of them in South Africa, which ought to be a country where nobody is deprived of access to electricity. And these are the basic rights that we still have to champion, that we still have to fight for. But we're now doing it in a context of the injustice of the impacts of climate change and the need for a climate justice that makes sure that people understand that it's not just governments that cause the greenhouse gas emissions. It's industry, it's transport, it's families, it's consumers, it's everybody.